Thank you for joining us and welcome to day 2 of the Conference on Race and Equality, Language and Education at Stanford's Graduate School of Education. My name is Brian Brown, and I have the privilege of representing my colleagues as the chair of the program. Today, we are excited to really bring forward a group of people who really meet theory to practice. Many of the discussions about mental health are left at a sense of helplessness, but these scholars do something different. They offer us an opportunity to think about what we know and what we can do to really build a community of healthy young people. There's nothing better than the joy of young people, and being able to see that brought out is a really powerful tool. So today, we have an incredible group of scholars to help us understand what we can do to help support the healthy development and growth of our young people. To make sure we do the proper job of introducing this incredible group of thinkers and leaders, I'm going to introduce one of our scholars. Our moderator today will be Emma Keller. Emma Keller is a doctoral student in our Developmental and Psychological Sciences program here in the School of Education. She's also a part of our program on Race and Equality, Language and Education. Emma received her BS in Youth and Social Motivation and a BS in English at the University of Virginia. Her research centers on the experiences of Black biracial adolescents, particularly in the areas of racial socialization, racial identity development, and psychological well-being. Her ultimate goal is to understand how parents and siblings can engage in racial socialization and form effective interventions that mitigate racial stress for young people and promote positive mental health for all outcomes for all racially minoritized students. Do me a favor and welcome Emma forward.
Hi, everyone. So thank you all for joining us for the second day of this conference. And thank you very much to the organizers of this event who have worked so hard to make these really important conversations happen. So today I have the privilege of introducing our 3 speakers, the authors of the recently released Healing Racial Stress Workbook for Black Teens, Skills to Help You Manage Emotions, Resist Racism, and Feel Empowered. This workbook arrives at a pivotal moment when the weight of racial stress on young shoulders is more evident than ever. But before we dive into this timely conversation, I'd like to share a bit more about our speakers. Dr. Farzana Saleem is an assistant professor in the Graduate School of Education at Stanford University. She earned her PhD in clinical and community psychology from the George Washington University. Dr. Saleem's research examines the influence of racial stressors and culturally relevant practices like racial socialization on the psychological health, academic success, and well-being of Black adolescents and other youth of color. Dr. Jessica Henry is a licensed clinical psychologist in Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Georgia, a national consultant, curriculum developer, and author. She's the co-founder and vice president of program development and evaluation for the Black Mental Wellness Corporation and founder and CEO of Community Impact Consultation and Psychological Services, a trauma-informed organization whose mission is to provide services to individuals and organizations affected by traumatic events. Dr. Henry is the current Senior Director of Behavioral Health for one of Washington, D.C.'s largest federally qualified health centers, and the previous clinical director of a Level 5 close security male prison and Georgia's largest youth homeless shelter. She received her bachelor's from Howard University, master's from Columbia University, and PhD in clinical psychology from the George Washington University. After receiving her PhD in 2014, she moved to Atlanta, Georgia, where she completed her postdoctoral fellowship at Emory University School of Medicine. Dr. Nicole Cammack is a licensed clinical psychologist in Maryland and Washington, D.C. She's founder, president, and CEO of Black Mental Wellness Corporation, and she also owns Healing Generations Psychological Services and Consultation Center, LLC, a private practice in Washington, D.C. Dr. Cammack received her bachelor's degree from Howard University and her PhD in clinical psychology from the George Washington University. Lastly, she completed a specialized postdoctoral fellowship with the National Center for School Mental Health at the University of Maryland, Baltimore School of Medicine. Throughout her career, she has continually focused on mental health issues specific to the Black community and identifying ways to address the cultural and systemic issues that impact Black mental health and wellness. We are honored to have all 3 of you here to share your invaluable research and practices, shedding light on the impacts of racial stress. Following the presentation, there'll be ample time for questions from the audience. So without further ado, let's hear from Dr. Saleem, Henry, and Cammack.
Thank you so much, Emma, for that wonderful introduction. We are happy to be here today and to bring you some components of our recently published workbook, Healing Racial Stress Workbook for Black Teens. And we will be doing a sort of a reflection and application from the workbook. Next slide. So just to give you all a roadmap of what you can expect, first, we wanted to start off by giving you a brief overview. How do we understand racism and how does racial stress impact you? And although our workbook is for teens, we want you to also think about yourself as we go through the presentation today. Think about when you were a teen and or your role in the lives of teens that you may be working with. Secondly, we will talk about skills, so building skills for navigating racism. And we will go through a game plan. How do you deal with racism in the world? And we will talk about some of the main environments that teens may encounter racism and how do you develop a game plan? And then we will end with question and answer. So that will be a time for you to interact with us. We do want this to feel interactive and conversational. And so if there are questions that come up, please add them in the chat and we will either address them at the end, or if they are appropriate for the slide we're on, we'll try to incorporate it at that time. Next slide. So now we want to present some of the poll results that you all may have answered. Okay, so we were trying to get a feel for who's in the room. So we have some district and county leadership, teachers, and there's a lot of people we don't know. So if you didn't get a chance to answer this question, you can always feel free to add it to the chat just to let us know your primary occupational role. Okay, and in this question, we really wanted to get into, again, as we're talking about teens, we want you to center your own experiences and think about, what you may have encountered. And so we wanted to get a feel for what are some of the experiences that you've personally encountered as it relates to racism. And if I'm looking, the top one was witnessing mistreatment of another person due to race. And so we'll talk a little bit about that. We have microaggressions and cultural insensitivity. It seems like you all have experienced all of them to some extent: humiliating and shaming comments, feeling isolated, racial battle fatigue, representation for the entire race. Those were all in the 50s. We want you to think about those experiences and sort of use this to center today as we think about, how it may impact you, what a game plan looks like, and moving forward, and how we can use this to inform the work you do with youth. Next poll. Okay, and then how much knowledge do you have about racial stress and trauma? And so a moderate amount seems to be, for most people, 58%. And for this presentation, that's why we're here today, right? We're going to talk about some of these things. This is the beginning of a conversation. We hope to provide you with some resources if you would like to continue this work as well. And again, we'll have a section for question and answers if there are things that we haven't addressed during the presentation. Okay, and then how comfortable do you feel? So how much you know and how comfortable you are two very different things. It seems like around 53% is somewhat comfortable. And then there's very comfortable. And what I often tell people is sometimes these conversations are not always comfortable, even if we've had our own experiences or we have knowledge. Sometimes in the moment, it can still feel uncomfortable. But what we know is that there are tools to help us have the conversations that may help to make it a little more comfortable. And we need to have a lot of these difficult conversations so that we can get to a place, especially as we think about our youth, where they're getting the resources and the tools and the supports that they need. And thank you all for answering those questions, and we'll go to the next slide.
Great. So hi, everyone. We are going to start the presentation, as Dr. Cammack said, with an overview of just understanding some basic definitions to ensure everyone is on the same page as it relates to what we mean when we're talking about racial stress and trauma. Next slide. So for a simple definition, we define racial stress and trauma as the emotional and physical response to negative race-related experiences. So these can be things like racism, discrimination, and this can lead to trauma. It doesn't mean that every experience will be traumatic, but it's possible that this could lead to trauma. When it leads to racial trauma, typically this means that it's elicited some sort of emotional or psychological harm that threatens psychological and physical integrity and safety and impacts daily life functioning. And typically you see this happening more long-term in terms of ongoing effects. And to be clear, so racial trauma can happen in response to a single situation that happens, or it could also be the accumulation of multiple incidents that over time develop an impact that mirrors trauma and trauma symptoms. And so this can be both something that happens directly, as we looked at in the poll questions. So this can happen to you as an individual, or it can be something that's vicarious. So something that you are witnessing happening to someone else in the community. And so there are many ways in which youth can experience race-related stressors, right? So where you live, where you go to school, where you hang out. Of course, social media is another way that now we know that youth are experiencing different types of stressors, including race-related stressors online. And so all of these factors influence exposure. And in addition to that, I think it's important to recognize that every day there are things that are happening that are traumatic in our world, and the effects will vary across persons. So a similar situation could happen to me, and that similar situation could happen to Dr. Henry, and we have very different responses to that. And no matter how often you experience racial stress and trauma, it can impact you in some sort of way, right? So it can change the way you view the world. It can influence your thoughts, your relationships. And just because something doesn't end up being traumatic doesn't mean that it's not stressful. And of course, we know that stress is linked to consequences too. And Dr. Henry will be talking more about that in just a bit in our presentation.
So we wanted to break down different experiences of racism and put them in ways that hopefully teens can understand. And so this first slide looks at when racism is easy to see. So this is what we call those overt racist actions. And so they are the easiest to see. And it's not hidden, it's more straightforward. And so that's where we think about like hate speech, racial slurs, someone using the N-word in class, hate crimes, racial teasing. So these are things that when most people see it, they would identify it as racism. But there are often times when racism is hidden and it's not as easy to see. And those are the times where a person may be questioning, did that just happen? Do I feel this way? And we call that covert racism. So it's not as easy to see. It may be a little more difficult to recognize because it's a lot more subtle. And because of that, that fact that it's subtle, the person may say, oh, that wasn't racist, or deny that it was racist. And the person who's experiencing it, again, may be replaying it and questioning whether it was in fact racism. And so, some examples of where we see this coming up often is like if we think about racial profiling or holding these negative stereotypes about a group of people, and it's solely based on their race. As we think about policies in schools, especially as we think about our youth, that unfairly ban students from wearing their hair in its natural state. And so, there was recently, I know Dr. Henry will talk about this, but there have been national stories repeatedly about students being unable to wear their hair. And this is also where we think about things like institutional racism and systemic racism. So it's there, it's hidden. And one final point is that even though it's not easy to see, there are a lot of consequences that come from it, both for the individual who's experiencing it or the group of people, but also how does this impact quality of life and all of these other factors for youth in these different settings. And then when you're unsure, it is racism. So this is, again, is not as clear. So when we think about microaggressions, and one of the ways that we think about microaggressions, if you think about the verbal statement, so something offensive or hurtful that someone may say to you, it could be behaviors, something someone may do towards you, or environmental, like a lack of representation in an environment, or rules that are offensive and not inclusive of the experience of Black people. So for example, if we think of a verbal statement, something that may be wrapped up as, oh, this is a compliment of saying you're pretty for a Black girl, or, oh, you speak very well, as if those things can't coincide with one another. There are also microaggressions show up when we think about schools and we're looking at discipline practices and suspensions, and educators or school staff may be perceiving the same behaviors differently based on the race of a student. So two students doing the same thing and maybe looking at it as aggressive or more hostile when it's done by a Black student. We also want to think about implicit biases, and this is something that we all have and need to be intentional about recognizing what they are and doing the work to change that. So these are the attitudes and beliefs that affect our behaviors. And we are not always consciously aware that it occurs. So it can happen and it's automatic and we're not even aware that it's happening. But we know, again, that there's impact that come from these biases as we think about the legal system, college admissions, hiring. And they are, again, these automatic responses, and it can impact how you interact with people based on, these judgments that you make. So we can think about race, ability, gender, culture, language. And finally, I just want to wrap up, as Dr. Farzana Saleem said earlier, is that there's also we have to think about the experience of what you may witness. So even though it is not your direct experience, if you witness these things happening to a friend or a peer or a group of students, there is still an impact that it can have on you as well.
And so in bringing this all together, this model, the developmental ecological model of youth racial trauma, is one in which just lays out this from a conceptual standpoint. And we won't go through this extensively, but just acknowledging, I think it's a helpful visual of historical trauma, right? So epigenetics, how behaviors and environments can change the way that your genes work. And so for some families, if we think about, particularly in the context today, the conversation of Black youth, understanding how historical trauma, the effects of that and how that might be passed down in different ways, visible and not. And then when we think about race-related stressors, again, it can be a single incident or multiple incidents that lead to a traumatic response or oftentimes symptoms, right? And this can vary by age. And so what the effects look like might vary very much so across development for young people. And so that's important for us to keep in mind. And also just wanted to highlight that there are different family and community level factors that influence the ways in which exposure might happen, but also protective factors can come into play. So we can think about the role that multiple contexts have in the way that youth both experience, but also can potentially process and manage race-related stressors. And as a result, therapists often look for 4 different types of indicators. Just like medical doctors might look for specific symptoms. For example, when you have the flu, there are specific things that folks might be looking for to say, okay, do you have a fever? Are you sneezing? Are you coughing? So oftentimes, if you think about it from a therapeutic standpoint, therapists are often looking for these pieces, which Dr. Henry will be going into examples of this, but things like having reoccurring memories of something, avoiding places, having it affect your mood, or even just being hypervigilant. And so Dr. Henry will elaborate on this now.
Okay, perfect. So racism can impact youth in a number of ways, like Dr. Saleem just said, and which includes their thoughts, attitudes about their racial group, and their racial identity. And so while some youth are aware of their race, other youth do not think of their race as an important part of their identity. And different experiences with racism can shape and form how adolescents think about their race and racial identity. And so racism is also linked to how we think, feel, and behave, as Dr. Saleem had mentioned. And so youth who experience racism and discrimination are more likely to report negative beliefs and thoughts about themselves and the world. No one cares, right? No one can be trusted. The world is completely dangerous, and distorted thoughts where they blame themselves. So examples of that is, it's my fault, I should have done something, I should have done more. They may also begin to ruminate on thoughts like, they are killing us, it can happen to me, I hate the police. While those thoughts are true, right? We want to recognize that they are true. Experiencing these thoughts over and over can lead to feelings that consist of high levels of racial stress and anxiety, sadness, anger, guilt, and loneliness. So it's important for us to just recognize that, the impact that it has on our feelings. And so as a result, youth may begin to act out aggressively. So it's important for us to identify and acknowledge those behaviors, act out aggressively, withdraw, isolate, engage in reckless and destructive behaviors. Some of those examples are excessive drinking and self-harm. They may also begin to appear jumpy and easily startled, like Dr. Saleem said, that hypervigilance, looking over their shoulders whenever the sirens go off, when a cop or someone reminds them of them, being easily jumpy. And so these thoughts, feelings, and behaviors in turn have an impact on our ability ability to trust and feel safe in their relationships. And so those feelings of irritability and anger can also influence their ability to get along with people that they once previously had good relationships with. And so depending on the context of their experience with racism, for instance, if it happened in school, it may cause them to want to even drop out of school. Again, those behaviors, what does that look like? And so the great thing about this workbook is that we provide a number of character examples throughout this book for youth who have and have not experienced racism. And we also provide a lot of opportunities and activities for these youth to explore the impact of racism and discrimination on who they are and how they interact with the world or with a trusted adult, with or without a trusted adult. But the truth is, our hope is that they do have a trusted adult to work through this workbook with to make it even that much more impactful.
Now we're going to talk a little bit about building skills. So after youth understand racism and after they understand how it impacts them, we then go into the skill building process. And so next slide. One of the things that we teach as a skill is how to just increase their comfort in initiating conversations on the topic with people that they trust to begin with. Right. So having them, for example, ask adults in their lives or people in their lives about their own experiences related to race-related stressors and their own feelings. And the idea behind this is that it not only builds connection, but it normalizes conversations as they learn about their own experiences and how people around them have navigated these different experiences. And some people might have parents that don't share the same racial identification as them. And so we're happy to chat about that in the Q&A. But I think that there are other ways in which parents might be able to negotiate different other forms of identity in which they can experience and or say that they have not had that experience, but there might be other forms of social identities in which they can discuss. So we want you all to think about your own experiences and your positionality and just share with us in the chat. So first, before you share, we want you to think back to your first memory of understanding race. So think a little bit about that. The first time you heard about it, the first time you understood your own experience and understanding what race was and your race. And then share in the chat this first question. So how did you deal with racial stress if you experienced it as a teenager? So we will have folks just spend a couple of seconds populating that in the chat and sharing with others.
I just received a message that the chat is disabled, so they're unable to put it in the chat, but maybe
Q&A feature.
Q&A.
Okay. Got it. Yep. So if you all can use the Q&A feature instead of the chat, because right now we're having some issues with that. And I don't think everyone will be able to see the responses coming in, but that's okay. A part of this is really just getting you all to be able to interact within the space and do some reflection in the space. So I see some different responses coming in about how people dealt with different racial stressors they experienced as a teenager. Some people said that I see one, I laughed it off. I tried to match the energy. Someone said I closed myself up. I only thought about overt racism before I delved into learning more about racism in the literature. So it sounds like folks were had different ways, right? Some people might dismiss it. Some people might actively decide to isolate. Some people might be grappling with what they've learned intellectually versus what they might be feeling personally. Thank you all for sharing those. And I'm going to hop to the next question just for the sake of time. If folks could also name a thought, a feeling, or a behavior that came up as a result of experiencing this. So a thought, a feeling, or a behavior. I see angry coming up, internalized it. That's a really big one. And that's a part of what the workbook aims to do too. I think a lot of times young people might internalize these experiences to think that something is wrong with them. And instead, we're trying to teach them to not internalize these experiences, but be able to understand that this is an external force and stressor that is happening outside of themselves. Yeah, some people said withdrawn, feeling inferior. Yeah, so we see a mixture of responses between anger, frustration, avoidance, sadness, going inward, withdrawing. And so again, a part of this is just having us think about what young people are experiencing, right? And so this is a part of something that's related to a part of their identity. And again, for our young Black youth, we know that racial identity is a really salient piece of identity, and identity is being shaped a lot during the developmental period of adolescence when they're teenagers. And so these things are influencing them. And so learning some of these skills, including how to have conversations and initiate conversations and normalizing conversations, is just one of many skills. Thank you all for sharing some of those.
So now we can jump into some more skills that we can work with youth. And so the whole section of this book is focused on helping Black teens build skills for navigating racism. And so it's important for adolescents to learn healthy ways to deal with those difficult thoughts and feelings that result from these experiences with racism, and to identify how their individual strengths, their family, their community, and cultural experiences are really a source of strength for them and are able to help them overcome these challenging situations. And so because adolescents may sometimes experience these difficulties with practicing and remembering them, right? This is and managing how to cope. It's really important for adults, caregivers, teachers, right? Clinicians and parents, those trusted adults overall, to help them navigate their experiences with racism. And so we list a number of different relaxation strategies that youth can use to help them relax after experiencing racism. But it really would be helpful for a trusted adult, you guys, to practice some of these strategies with them, taking deep breaths, right? The box breathing, 4 squared, all that, using distraction techniques like counting counting to 100 by 7, or counting backwards from 60, right? Taking a break and going for a walk and reminding them and helping them to identify and explore who and when they can talk to, or someone who they can trust. So just really helping them to identify those skills and helping them to practice those skills that we highlight in the book. And because their thoughts often are impacted by these negative experiences, and they may begin to ruminate, like I discussed before, although truthful thoughts, but they may begin to ruminate on negative, and they may become harmful over time. We identified a few strategies in the book for adolescents to help practice how to challenge their thoughts, which is really important. And so these activities can be, again, guided by and facilitated by a trusted adult or clinician in a one-on-one format, or in a group format. And so in a classroom, a group, after school. And so these exercises are meant to be age appropriate and engaging for youth. And so they include the unhelpful thought playlist and best friend exercises that are included in the book. And so for the playlist activity, we do remind teens that, similar to creating a playlist of their favorite music artists and songs, our goal is for them to identify their unhelpful thoughts that may be similar to reoccurring playlists in their head, and to identify and replace those thoughts with more helpful thoughts. So we have a column where they rewrite those unhelpful thoughts into more helpful thoughts, which is their positive playlist. Another activity would be for trusted adults to help facilitate the best friend activity, where the adolescent is asked to identify unhelpful thoughts and to challenge them by, asking themselves, if my best friend had these thoughts, what advice would I give them, right? So that's an activity that can be well facilitated by a trusted adult. And so additional strategies for helping adolescents navigate racism, they include helping them to explore community engagement activism, and the celebration of Black pride and joy activities for ways to manage their distress. And so this is where we recognize that it's not okay, again, for us to continue saying that this is an experience that you will encounter and that you have to learn how to cope with, but also helping them to develop that resistance, right? Resistance strategies when it's safe to do so, like confronting a friend or an adult who makes inappropriate racial remarks, or standing up for a friend who is targeted and called racial slurs, joining a club, protest, things of that sort. Also, our goal is to really help them to identify a number of strategies for Black pride and joy. What are those activities that we can all come up with? Celebrating Juneteenth, learning Black history, Black dance, going to church and religious ceremonies. And it's also important that they do that, not just to learn them, but how do they put it in their schedules, right? So creating a schedule for engaging in these activities. And so now we're at the developing game plan portion, right? So they experienced some racism, they've identified some skills. So now it's important that they identify a game plan to move forward, right? And so what does that game plan look like? Okay, so it's important for us to remember that while Black adolescents are unique individuals, their development is really largely influenced by their experiences with interconnected environmental systems. What is those? School, family, community, cultural expectations, and even their own history, where racism and discrimination exist and it's experienced within. And so it's important for us to remember institutional and systemic racism. And somebody asked that question, and I don't mind defining those when we get a second, is embedded in each of these systems. And for us to provide the best support, we must fully understand our role and how we can support our Black youth within these systems. And so while going through this section, I want you to think about, because Dr. Saleem and Dr. Cammack are going to talk a little bit more. So I want you to think about that Black teenage boy who Dr. Cammack alluded to earlier in Texas, who was recently suspended for 2 weeks due to him wearing his hair in a natural Black hairstyle, dreadlocks. And the school's attempt to use policies, that's the institutional racism, policies and practices embedded in our practices. So they attempted to use the policies around natural hairstyles to suspend this Black boy. And so imagine you being a teacher or administrator within a school system that perpetuates institutional racism and causing further racial stress and trauma to this young Black boy. And I want each of you to begin to think about how you would begin to help this Black boy. What is your role in protecting him and helping him develop this game plan to manage racism? And remember, you are embedded in this system.
So as you're thinking about some of your roles across these contexts, one activity that we have like different activities for the youth to work through in the book, and we always encourage them to identify safe adults or someone that they trust that they maybe can talk to and about these things and to help them navigate it. And so as you think about your role, if there were a teen who came to you and expressed some recent experience, here are some steps you could think about, really figuring out what happened, because oftentimes, there's a lot of emotions involved, and, just seeing if you can get the person to tell you what happened. And you can think about what was your response. And if you think about yourself, even as this teen is explaining things to you, you might be having an emotional response, or you may be having some thoughts. And so you want to recognize that as well. And we also want to normalize that shock can also be a huge part of this. When we think about teens and the different environments they're in, so they're in sports and organizations, they're at school, these may be kids that, people that they really spend a lot of time around. And so they didn't expect it to happen. And so you want to also get some information. Where were you? You don't have to get, all the details back to back to back, but just to start thinking about how do we clearly recognize what happened? And then you want to go into those thoughts and feelings. And these are things that we're encouraging teens to do as well with the book. So, there may be some feelings that you have after the event. What were they? What were some of the thoughts that you had after the event? And we want to normalize that the range of emotions that you feel during and after, and it could be a few weeks later, are all normal and a part of this, but we want to recognize and make that connection between this thing happened and here are your feelings and thoughts, and then it's time to talk it out. And this is where, I was reading through the Q&A of your own experiences that you had both growing up and how people may have responded. And so you have to be mindful when someone is talking to you that you're not also projecting what you feel, but just giving them that safe space. Think about, what did you need when you were a teen and you had these experiences, and what would you have liked to receive from someone? So being able to talk it out with the person and then helping them come up with a solution. What do you do? Because these things often happen. And some people may say, I read a comment where they said, race is a social construct, and the conversation ended there. And then it still leaves you like, whoa, what am I going to do with these emotions? And, is there anything that I can do, or do I have to just deal with this because this is the way that things are? And so what is the solution? What will get you the outcome that you want? Does the solution help others to better understand your feeling or your perspective? Was the problem or situation solved? And this is a place where you can come up with a lot of different solutions. And it may be helpful to think about these things with a trusted adult. And then the teen is going to implement the game plan. All right, you pick a solution. We have a list here. You can pick something that feels like a good place to start. And then we want to sort of emphasize, now you get to see, did it work? Do you feel like you were able to, get someone to understand your perspective, your feelings, your thoughts? Did it feel like it was resolved? And this is also a space for adults. If they trusted you to bring it to them, being able to come back to them and see what happened. This may also be a place where they say that did not work. Okay, let's figure out what are some other options that we have. And so you can go back to the game plan as you work with this with teams. And so I think the main thing is being that trusted person, being present with them, allowing them that safe space to talk it through, and then coming back to the conversation. And what this tells the teen as well is this is important. I'm in it with you. You don't have to figure it out on your own.
And so in thinking about this, of course, we want to think about how we're supporting young people, equipping young people with this type of experience that is in many ways inevitable, right? So just like we have different safety talks with our young people about talking to strangers, right? What to do in certain situations. Dealing with racism is a reality that many folks are preparing young people for because of safety and because it is an inevitable stressor, again, in the context for our Black youth. But we also want to talk about the fact that this isn't about kids just doing the work alone, right? So we can equip our children with different things that help them be able to navigate the world and can provide them with tools in their tool belt for this. But we also, as adults, have to do this work too. And so a part of this is with one section within the workbook is within the game plan for dealing with racism is really thinking about anti-racist action, right? And so in one part of the workbook, it's asking youth about, what have you done in the past? And there's a list of different strategies in responding to race-related experiences. And then what can you commit to doing in the future? And the list of items here is from a measure by Aldana et al. In 2019 that has really great examples of thinking about critical action, right? And engaging in anti-racist behaviors. And so this is just a short list of many options, right? So it might be confronting a friend, right, who uses racially charged language or makes an inappropriate remark. It might mean standing up for someone who's a stranger. It might mean being more mindful myself before I say comments or even jokes. It might also just mean seeking more knowledge, right? It might mean joining protests or joining or reaching out to social media outlets to report things that are happening. So there's a lot of different ways in which we can think about a game plan and what we can commit to do in the future. And so we just want to encourage you all to think about this as well. So we would like you to think about just on this short list or other ideas that you have about what could you commit to trying to do differently, either short term or long term. So this is a few items, but again, there might be other thoughts that you have. So we'll just take a couple of seconds to have you all reflect on what is something that I can commit to trying or doing differently that I already do not do. And so in addition to that, we want to just acknowledge the fact that healing and intervention needs to take place across ecological contexts. Again, while this workbook is designed to equip our young people with skills and how to navigate the realities of these situations in the moment, right? It's also about thinking about change at the individual level for folks, also at these other contexts, within these other contexts, like the community level, as well as at a systemic level. So how can we do a better job at really thinking about what change looks like across these different tiers of different ecological systems, right? Things that are happening both in our community and when we interact with others, but also systems, policies, and practices that need to change. So this is just a call to action for healing as well as intervention across these contexts. And so as we wrap up, we wanted to leave you with other resources as well. There are plenty of resources that can help in different capacities as it relates to this. And so these are just a few of many that we wanted to raise up in addition to the workbook that we have. And we thank you all for listening, and hopefully you were able to engage some within the virtual space here with us today and reflecting on this, not just for our young people and us working with young people, but also for ourselves. And so we will now turn it over to Q&A.
And thank you so much for that informative presentation. I'm sure there's going to be lots of questions from the audience. So we're going to open up the floor for that. I'll start us off with a question to give people time to submit via the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen. And we'll get through as many questions as we can with the time we have left. So my first question concerns building resilience. So you've shared that this is essential for all students, and as many people in our audience are teachers or educators, I'm wondering if you could share some practical techniques that educators can implement to empower Black students with the tools they need to bounce back from adversity and maintain their mental well-being.
And so some of those things which I had mentioned earlier, but some of it is just a lot of our youth have been resilient in a number of ways, right? So helping them to identify strategies in which they've been resilient before, reminding them of ways they've been resilient, like when they had to move a few times, how did they bounce back from that? They went to foster care, but they still managed to be straight A students. That's being resilient, right? So helping them to explore and identify their own strengths. They have it in that is internal to them, right? Helping and reminding of that, but helping to develop coping skills too. Again, I've mentioned developing different relaxation skills and coping skills, helping them to challenge their negative thinking. So all skills that they can learn in therapy. But again, while it is important to acknowledge the resilience, we also want to equally highlight and push the point of resistance, that they are not just expected to cope with their experience, that we want to empower them too, that they can do more to change their situation.
I like that. And I just wanted to add, when I think about things teachers can do in the classroom, some of that is just that encouragement, right? Like it doesn't always just have to be based on this racial experience, but making sure you see the students that are in your classroom, that you're like encouraging them or pointing out their strengths. Oftentimes kids get in this place where they're used to people giving them that negative feedback. And so they begin to sort of like believe those things about themselves. And then if we give them that positive feedback, we notice that they also like they want more of that. And so those are some ways where you can just give those subtle, encouraging words. I saw where you did this with your peer. I really appreciate that about you, or something just to point out things that may not be as obvious, or that most people may not comment about, like with young kids.
I like that, Nicole. I'm sorry, just a comment. Like my daughter has a tendency to be a little bit more aggressive, but the feedback that I love is like when she sees a peer who's sad and down, I've been hearing more like, she's so kind. She always runs up to them and gives them something to make them happy so that they stop crying, and is very caring. And so I always say that you are so kind, you are caring, you are just, you're going to have an amazing day today. So it's like, how are we uplifting them by the words and affirmations we're saying to them, we're speaking to them.
That's right. And just to add on one more thing to that, some people have a term that they're using called micro affirmations in response to microaggressions. And so that might be some things that people might choose to look up, right? So that's choosing words, your tone of voice, listening, caring, facial expression, nods that are affirming. So how can you even engage in micro as well as macro affirmations and gestures for young people? And I also think related to thinking about inclusive classroom environments and spaces, a part of feeling seen and valued also means seeing yourself within the classroom and feeling respected and represented to the extent that you can, right? So I think each one of us we desire to feel seen, right? So how can we make sure that these spaces are inviting and welcoming for our young Black folks, and that they see themselves depicted and hear their experiences depicted and validated within different aspects of the classroom context, whether that is through the curriculum or whether that is through conversations or celebrations, or even I like to even challenge, visually, what is in the classroom on the walls, in the different spaces, that all can inform the way that youth are seen within that space.
Yeah, thank you for that. So we've got lots of questions coming in through the Q&A. So the first one I'm going to ask is, for teens whose mechanism is to shut down or close themselves off, how would we promote their engagement with these exercises, especially within the school context?
I think a lot about how we are listening right? Listening to our young people and coming from a place of curiosity. This has been a big thing that I've been stressing, both for myself and for others, right? Like, how can we, when we are unfamiliar with something, or when something is happening that we don't quite understand, instead of making assumptions or judgments about it, how can we approach it with a mindset of curiosity? And a lot of times we don't know what might be happening internally with young people, right? And so I think being curious, and we also know that the relationship between teachers and students is a big protective factor in navigating difficult conversations, as well as just helping them adjust within the academic space. And so given the importance of what we know about teacher-student relationships and trust, that would be, I think, a very basic starting point of how can we do a better job at building trust and building relationships. And we understand teachers have a lot on their plates and they have a lot of students, but to the extent that they can think about building those relationships early on, and again, approaching things with a perspective of curiosity. We don't have to have all the answers. We don't have to know everything. There's not one way to do something, but I think those are some very simple ways to start.
And just to add to that, as you build that trust with them and you're having that natural curiosity, I just wanted to point out, like, you don't have to go through these, these activities right away. Maybe part of it is just getting to the point of trusting them, but always being that person who's showing up, or maybe, like, even as we think about problem solving, going back to the teen and checking in. So you can always, even if you notice them more withdrawn, like, how are you checking in, and being consistent in that way. And you never know, like, they will start to look at you as a safe person, as someone who's reliable and dependable. So even in therapy, we see this. There are some people where it takes them a little more time to get to a place of feeling comfortable to even do this work. And we have to recognize there are a lot of emotions connected to it, a lot of experiences. And so we want to make sure that they're also ready for the work before we just jump in, like, we need to do this activity.
And I just wanted to say real quick, but just validating immediately, like, this is going to be rough. It's hard. It's difficult. So letting them know that it's okay to, take a second and not share right away, not pressuring them, but to have a moment to sit down, offer different techniques and strategies too. Maybe they don't want to verbalize it. I remember when I first started doing therapy and I started working with kids, giving them outlets, listening to music, share with me, what's your favorite song when you're angry or you're sad? I had to use different ways to get them engaged. So we have to look at their needs and be flexible.
Yeah, thank you. So we've got a really interesting question here. It says, as an Asian American, the model minority myth is often discussed in our context. This myth is particularly insidious because it targets multiple groups of individuals, but in different ways. For Asian Americans, it can be difficult to talk about this, as the myth perpetrates largely positive stereotypes for our group at the expense of others. Do you have any suggestions on how to effectively talk about this difficult subject within our community to be an anti-racist ally?
So it sounds like the question is, how are we thinking about allyship, like anti-racist allyship, and then the similarities across groups as it relates to experiences with racism and discrimination. And so a couple of quick things that come to mind. I think that when we're talking about building solidarity and allyship across groups, there are ways in which we can talk about alignment, the experiences that are unique that we might be going through. But there are also ways which we can validate and acknowledge there are differences, right? So I think welcoming the space to talk about similarities as well as unique experiences is really important. And we do know that there are effects of race-related stressors for Asian American communities. There's a colleague, Anna Lau at UCLA, as well as many other folks that talk about kind of this striving persistence behavioral style, and how a lot of times, even if for our high achieving students, Black students, Asian students, they might be performing really well, especially if we're in the education space academically, but that doesn't mean that there aren't things going on both under the skin and internally emotionally, right? And so when we look at things like cortisol levels, right? Just because someone is performing well academically doesn't mean that their mental health or physical health is well, and that there might be effects that are happening that are invisible, in which there are consequences. So just want to also acknowledge that sometimes that is overlooked or not seen, but that's one suggestion that I would have.
Okay, thank you for that. So our next question concerns people in our audience who are school leaders. So what advice can you share with school leaders about building programs that encourages both the parents and the teachers to build racially affirming spaces?
I always like to have caution when saying these things because, as you mentioned, Emma, like in schools and teachers and educators, you all are already doing a lot. And so, not in a way of trying to put more on you, but because of this is the question. But I want to use my daughter's school because I have been like so incredibly proud of the work that they're doing. And one of the things when we're thinking about this work is it started with staff. Like it really started with them taking a deep dive about, what are our strengths? What are some areas we need to strengthen? And what are the resources we need to get there? And so it was them doing a lot of the work, having these types of conversations, going to different trainings, figuring out how to create an inclusive environment where were there like places again that they could strengthen and make it look more inclusive of all the or representative of all the students that they serve at this school. And so that was a big piece. The teachers started doing the work, and then they sort of thought about it from a systemic level. What is some work that we can do with parents? So how do we have a parental group where they can maybe talk about these topics, and it's separate and it's a safe space. I'm actually a part of the parent group, and what we do is it's a safe space for all parents. So we're learning together, and people can come and learn about what's happening in the classroom, but also, your personal experiences and how do we support our school and the children and the youth at the school. And then the third piece was actually doing the work with the students. And so they created these affinity groups where students could have these safe spaces, but then they also incorporated it into all of the language of the school, into activities that occurred. And so when we're thinking about these topics, it's not that we want to address, Black students only, but how are we thinking about this if we go back to the ecological perspective, at least in this school system? How are we tapping into multiple levels and layers of educating people and providing resources across all the levels? And then what ends up happening is the language is consistent, among staff, with the students, and with the families. And so it's been interesting to watch, even with my daughter, like she asks questions like, oh, what is the person's pronouns? And these are things that she learned at school, but it makes me check myself to say, I need to be more intentional about that, even when I'm talking to her and when I'm talking to my daughter and not making those assumptions. So those are some ways that schools can think about, programming and using, if you have it, the resources within the school. So if there are parents who have expertise, if they have connections to other people, or if there are people in the community who's willing to donate time and resources, being able to tap into all of that to help support those school efforts.
We often hear about the importance of parental involvement in a child's education and well-being, and I'm wondering if you all have any resources or strategies to engage parents and caregivers in supporting the mental health of Black students.
Yeah, there's a number of ways in which parents can support the mental health as well as racial identity development of our young people. I think that, parents oftentimes, I think sometimes parents can feel isolated. And so I think being in community is one aspect. Are there ways in which parents and community, whether that's within the communities that they already have, maybe it's their neighborhood, maybe it's their friend group, again, how do we normalize conversations about what's going on with our young people? I think oftentimes there's still, we've come a long way, and there's still stigma. There's still stigma about mental health in particular. And so I think the more we can normalize the conversations, my child has been going through this. Does anybody else, have a similar experience? I've seen a lot of movement and encouragement from when I used to host parent support groups at Children's Hospital LA, of just being around other parents that also had children with learning differences, and navigating that, and also learning what system, like what is the system in place, and then how do I navigate that system? Because a lot of times some parents might have resources of, there's a free consultation for how you can get an IEP and get your child accommodations over here, or this organization does a lot of consultation around advocating for your student if it seems like a suspension or something was unjust, and so this is free counsel over here. So I think a lot about how parents can get connected to resources, but also just get connected to community, to normalize conversation, share resources, and be a support to one another. and then connect with other aspects of support too.
Well, thank you very much for your thoughtful answers, and thank you to our audience for the questions.
So as we close, I want to first start by thanking our incredible group of scholars. I mean, for what you offered in an hour was absolutely amazing. I'm going to offer a challenge to those of you in the audience. We'll send this out, all of the links, and I encourage you to share this with as many school leaders as possible. They're going to need this supportive system, this supportive thinking, and you all have provided in such a concise fashion. We owe you a debt, so thank you. We are not done. We have one more day at our conference, but tomorrow is a working day. We're going to do three things. In the morning, we invite you to join us as we think about how monolingual and monocultural teachers have to teach and support a multicultural and multilingual student population. What do we do to provide best possible educational outcomes? That is our first session. And then we want to thank our caterer, Jackie's Place in San Jose, who is going to help us. And we named it wrong. It should have been brunching and brainstorming, because we're going to brunch tomorrow after that first session, and then talk about media. Many of the discussions and how people come across issues of race, culture, and language come through media. No one is reading Derek Bell's Faces from the Bottom of the Well and then saying, I stand against critical race theory. What is happening is people are communicating in media perceptions of what is happening. So our second session is going to explore, how do we invert this process? What do we need to be communicating about what is actually happening in schools to inform parents and to inform policymakers broadly? And then we'll close with the working session. How do you design a more equitable working environment, a department, a school that centers equity and support of all students? And so that session will be led by a group of incredible scholars as we engage in brainstorming. You're going to leave with a product, and the product you'll leave with Saturday is a clear understanding of what to do, how to do it, and a network of colleagues to do it with. And so again, I thank you for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing as many of you all tomorrow. The challenge still exists. Share this incredible session. We'll have it live online by the end of the week, and I'll send out an email link to everyone so you have this as a resource. Thank you so much, and have a great rest of your day.